Northern Ireland has been handed a different rule book to deal with Brexit compared to the rest of the UK. And already the so-called border in the Irish Sea is causing friction. Could what's been called the protocol cause long-term damage? In this programme, we'll be looking at what leaving the EU means for the chances of lasting peace and prosperity for the whole island of Ireland. This is Roundtable. Good to have your company. I'm David Foster. Indeed, in this programme, we'll be examining what all of it means for the continued existence of the United Kingdom. Compromise? Well, that came with the Good Friday Peace Agreement a generation ago. Can it be achieved again? It's been nearly 100 years since Northern Ireland was established. And for a large part of that time, there was conflict, the Troubles. Republican armed groups wanted unity with the Irish Republic. Unionists were loyal to the United Kingdom. The Good Friday Agreement of 1998 brought peace and an end to border checks and security posts seen as unwanted symbols of division. But the Brexit vote in 2016 has complicated the picture. The main aim has been to avoid a return to the hard border between the UK North and the EU South on the island of Ireland. So the EU and UK agreed to the Protocol, a de facto border in the Irish Sea between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. Northern Ireland effectively remains part of the EU's single market and customs union, so checks are carried out at ports. Port workers have faced threats from unionist supporters who reject the notion that Northern Ireland is treated differently to the rest of the United Kingdom. And there is a lot more paperwork. So many goods have stopped arriving into Northern Ireland and businesses are frustrated. Now there are questions not only about whether the protocol is working, but also about Northern Ireland's political future and the peace that was so hard won. Well, I'm very pleased to say that we can get the conversation rolling by introducing from Belfast David Phinnimore, Professor of European Politics at Queen's University in that city. We go to Dublin and welcome Connal Parr, Senior Lecturer in History at Northumbria University. And back to Belfast, we have Malachi O'Doherty, writer, journalist and author of the upcoming book, Year of Chaos, Northern Ireland on the Brink of Civil War, 71-72. This is a question for each one of you to consider, and I'll welcome your thoughts once I've spoken to David about it. Why is it that any talk of a hard border has people going back to thoughts of the bad old days of bombs and bullets?
I think it has some people going back to the bad old days, because obviously for many people a physical hard border was very much to do with the security forces being present, and the need, as far as the UK government was concerned, was to protect the border and to combat terrorism. I think the hard border, though, for other people is also just about having restrictions on their movement on the island of Ireland, because over the last 20 years, so much of the infrastructure has gone. We have no physical presence of a border. And I think for a lot of people, a return to a hard border would be a symbol of a regression in the peace process.
But it wouldn't necessarily, Con, let me come to this, it wouldn't necessarily mean that inevitably there would be trouble.
No, there wouldn't inevitably be trouble, but at the same time, you do get something at the moment where people are talking about political instability. There is some talk on the unionist/loyalist side of withdrawing from the Stormont Assembly. There's even talk of withdrawing from the Good Friday Agreement, which is, of course, an historic international treaty in lots of ways, and has kept structured violence off the streets of Northern Ireland. Despite this, you still get the hum of dissident Republican activity, and there are threats of violence which have recently been made, and there was recently threats made against the port workers of Larne and Belfast, so some of them were temporarily withdrawn and some are in fact still withdrawn. But I also think what I wanted to pitch this to was in the context also of since Brexit, and the reason why there have been difficulties since the Brexit vote in June 2016, there has been a situation where frankly, the talk of a border poll and a united Ireland is very much back on the agenda for a lot of people in Northern Ireland. And it's ironic because before then, it really wasn't an issue. It really wasn't on the agenda at all. So you do have to bear in mind that that does trigger instability and does trigger a certain amount of unrest and distress, especially from within Ulster Unionism, when there is that constitutional uncertainty.
Yeah, it's something we'll go into in a great deal more detail in just a moment. But Malachi, I want to bring you in. In the course of the last 20 years, 20 plus years since the Good Friday Agreement, a great deal has changed, I would suggest, not least with the movement of people from different communities, north and south, a certain secularization, if you like, of Ireland. So why is this such a bad thing?
I think Brexit itself tells us that much of politics is about a sense of identity rather than about the practical conditions that we live under. And I think a majority of people in Northern Ireland voted to stay within the European Union. The decision was taken essentially over their heads by England, by the English voter.
Well, let me just say it was 44% to leave and 56%. You're absolutely right. 56%, right, yeah. A pretty big majority to stay.
Yeah. So I think that was that felt to people who would identify as Irish in Northern Ireland as an affront. You know, it kind of clarified the conditions within the Union of the UK, which are that we're not an equal partner with Britain in that union, that Britain having the bigger numbers, England having the bigger numbers, will make the decisions. And I think that sense of affront needed a reply. And I think in many ways the concern about the hard border was the reply to that sense of affront, rather than merely a concern that violence would break out around it. Because rationally, why would a paramilitary in Belfast who wants a united Ireland concern him or herself with the documentation that a lorry driver would have to show at the border? So I think we're into the whole. I think we're into that area of identity politics and affront, and I think that England, having gone through something very similar, having expressed its desire for Brexit against all practical good sense advice, is therefore in a good position to understand why another country might have similar concerns.
All right, I tell you what, we're going to hear from Michael Gove, Cabinet Office Minister, on the protocol, this invisible line in the Irish Sea.
The overarching aim of the protocol is to make sure that the gains that the people of Northern Ireland have enjoyed in the last 20 or so years are consolidated and built on. And at the moment, as this committee will be aware, there are concerns across communities in Northern Ireland about the impact of the protocol.
So, David, let me pick up and ask you, is the protocol workable? Is it the least worst option?
I think it certainly is workable. It was designed to be workable, and the UK and the EU agreed back in 2019, 2020 that it would be workable. I think part of the problem is that the various people haven't necessarily come to terms with the reality of it. And also, we only understood very, very late in the day, late last year, that the real context in which it needed to be implemented, i.e. the UK-EU relationship. I think now that we've got clarity around that, I think there is a sense that, okay, well, there are a certain number of teething difficulties around it, some practical issues around how do you actually implement controls, how do you get the IT systems up and running. But on the other hand, there is this major political problem insofar as, understandably, many people, going back to Malachi's point about identity politics, really fear the sense that checks and controls on goods coming into Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK, indeed bans on some goods coming into Northern Ireland, is really affecting their position within the United Kingdom. It's undermining their sense of Britishness as being part of the UK. So I think from a technical, practical sense, yes, a lot of it can be made to work if you accept what's in the protocol. The problem is there's a lot of what's in the protocol is really anathema to many people who would see themselves as loyalist or unionist.
Remind us about the EU vaccination row, which was very, very recent, and it sort of highlighted how fragile matters can be north and south of the border.
Well, it highlights how fragile things are, and it also highlights how quickly things can take on a political dimension, which was unintended in the first place. The original purpose of the withdrawn regulation was to impose export controls on vaccinations out from the EU to third countries. So you'd essentially have restrictions on the movement of vaccines from the EU into the UK. In the process of putting that in place, reference was made to applying safeguards on the movement of vaccines from Ireland into Northern Ireland. Okay, now for many people that immediately meant that the EU was going to impose a hard border on the island and restrict the movement of goods. Now, I don't think that was actually ever the intention. I don't think that would have ever actually come to pass, but it was soon escalated into this sense of, okay, the EU for the last 4 years has been saying no hard border on the island of Ireland. Now, at the drop of a pen, it's willing or the drop of the hat, it's willing to impose that. And therefore, what is the real understanding of the situation in Ireland, Northern Ireland, on the part of the EU? For many units, you cannot therefore trust the EU to look after the interests of the island of Ireland, of Northern Ireland in this protocol context, and hence the row has escalated, or the context or the situation has escalated, such that you have those who have always been opposed to the protocol seeing this as a pretext for demanding its removal from the UK-EU relationship. I don't think that's going to happen, but we've moved very, very quickly from a fairly pragmatic approach towards trying to make the protocol work to a situation where you've got significant sections of society in Northern Ireland wholly opposed to the protocol.
And where you can see how quickly things can flare up. Connal, I'll come to you in just a moment, but Malachi, both as a writer, journalist, and as a resident of Belfast, how have you noticed a change since Brexit, since January the 1st of this year? Are goods harder to get? Do people say lives much more difficult for them?
No, not really. I mean, my wife orders in food for her bird feeder in the garden and can't get that, so that's a problem. I don't think people go to war over birdseed. I think for me personally, I have not felt any impact. I think some things that I ordered on Amazon took a wee bit longer than they would have done. Maybe that's down to the protocol. There's no way I can know that that's down to the protocol. It might be down to something
that's
else.
From a personal point of view. What are you hearing as a journalist?
Well, obviously I'm seeing that people are complaining about some empty shelves in supermarkets. But what I'm hearing more is angst around identity, the sense that the union between Britain and Ireland, or between Northern Ireland and Britain, has been weakened, that people are being prompted, if you like, to do their shopping in the Irish Republic when they're free to move again, because they're not free to move to do that. And maybe maybe the end of lockdown will reveal some changes. I come back to the idea that this is not about practical concerns, that this is about the sense of identity. And that might be a hard thing sometimes to empathize with, unless you feel that needling yourself in your own identity. But I think unionism is in a very tricky position at the moment. Unionism is now in a minority. When I was writing my book, The Year of Chaos, about 1972, the common term for describing unionism was the majority. And the common term used for the Catholic community, the nationalists, was the minority. That was the balance. That was the problem in Northern Ireland, that you had a majority political ideology in favor of the union, which was taking little account of the concerns of a minority community, which identified as Irish. That situation has changed radically. Both those communities are pretty much even as minorities, because there are other people on top who are also a minority, but who are less concerned about the identity issue,
which is interesting, because I've been reading. Connal, you tell me if this is true. I've been reading that a number of, if you want of a better term, white middle class unionists who previously would have been staunchly behind the Crown and the Union now don't seem so bothered about it, and are perhaps moving towards a united Ireland idea in the long run.
I don't know. I wouldn't completely overstate that. I think that there is still a long way to go before a lot of unionists completely shift their orientation to becoming suddenly supporters of United Ireland. But at the same time, there is no question that Brexit has shaken that, and that there is some kind of a conversation going on between what we'd call civic Irish nationalism and civic unionism, and that's where you're alluding to the more sort of middle class, well-heeled unionists potentially thinking, oh, we look across the border and we see, you know, somebody like Leo Varadkar, and we can think we can do business with somebody like that, and we also think that bed is better for us in a constitutional sense. What I would return to very briefly is the idea that think about what unionism is and what it used to be. So I do follow this point, and I think it's worth emphasizing. In May 1974, unionists and loyalists can bring down a government by what was the Ulster Workers' Council strike, and they can get a hold of the petrol and power supply, dwindle it to the extent that it becomes untenable. Likewise, in 1985, and 23rd of November 1985, they can get 100,000 people outside for the Ulster Says No rally against the Anglo-Irish Agreement. Unionism cannot do that anymore. It doesn't have the boots on the ground quality that it once had. That being said, what Northern Ireland always tells us is that just a few people causing disruption and havoc can ratchet up tension, can lead to a situation where there is a certain amount of instability. And there was a poll, the final thing I wanted to say is there was a poll on the 1st of February from Lucid Talk, which showed that the DUP was 1%, the Democratic Unionist Party, the apparent largest party of unionists, was 1% behind, was 1% in front of the Alliance Party. And this poll very much spooked the Democratic Unionist Party, and is their fear, because they're hemorrhaging votes to the right, to the traditional unionist voice, Jim Mallister's party, and to the left, to the Alliance Party. And that is their sort of nightmare scenario. Then Sinn Féin comes top of the poll. They were on 24% in that particular poll. So that will be a psychic blow to the largest party of unionism, and there will be a level of action that flows from that.
And I think you're right,
Okay,
Connal,
David,
because I think what you will see...
Oh, yeah, please carry on, yeah.
If I may butt in. I think we have an election to the Assembly next year. So on the back of what Connal is saying, you have a very strong incentive within unionism to consolidate, you know, to pull the smaller unionist forces together, and they will tend to consolidate against a strong, ardent pro-union position. You're seeing something similar happening on the Republican side with a build-up of concern about policing and the emergence of a campaign, you know, against the legitimacy of the current police service. And my suspicion is that is both sides realizing that they will suffer if they are not sufficiently sectarian, essentially, come the next election. Elections tend to pull people back into their camps and harden attitudes, and that, unfortunately, is what we're moving towards at the moment.
Thanks for that, Connal. David, I was going to put to you, I will put to you now, something that Joe Biden said before he took over the presidency. It was only September of last year, talking about trade deals between the UK and the US being contingent on respect for the Good Friday Agreement. This is what he had to say. We can't allow the Good Friday Agreement that brought peace to Northern Ireland to become a casualty of Brexit. Any trade deal between the US and the UK must be contingent upon respect for the agreement and preventing the return of a hard border period. Now, Joe Biden has Irish roots. He's going to put a lot of pressure on whoever it happens to be to make sure that this doesn't fall apart.
Yes, no, I agree. It's been a very clear message from the Biden camp from before the presidential elections and indeed since. And I think it's Biden speaking, I think, for broader sets of interests who don't see any alternative to the effective implementation of the 98 Belfast Good Friday Agreement and the avoidance of a hard border on the island of Ireland. I think that's why you've got a large number of people, despite the obvious unionist concerns, rowing in behind the protocol and trying to make it work. And this goes back to, I think, Michael Gove's statements this week, that, okay, that despite what the Prime Minister has said about potentially triggering Article 16, the line which Gove has generally taken is, okay, let's focus on...
Sorry, remind our viewers and me what Article 16 is.
Article 16 was the clause that was nearly activated by the EU the other week around the vaccines, and which was seen to be drawn on very hastily and unnecessarily. And I think most people would agree with that.
Right, the nuclear option.
Well, it's been presented as the nuclear option, yes. But okay, the EU stepped back. But the response on the part of the UK was obviously, initially quite measured by London, then insisting a whole series of concessions were made in and around the implementation of the protocol. But since then, the language coming out of the discussions between the EU and London is, well, let's try and find pragmatic solutions here. Let's try and make the protocol work. And I think that at the back of the likes of Gove's mind is the fact that, well, everybody's looking for the protocol to work. And that includes people outside, including the likes of Biden. And if the UK does not pursue the implementation of the protocol and avoid the hard border, then I think that will have consequences in its affairs with the US.
Well,
okay,
I think
each
to
one
be
of
fair,
you.
that
Yeah, Malachi, go on, jump in.
don't say that. I wouldn't agree that everyone wants the protocol to work. I'm not sure even Arlene Foster wants the protocol to work, or at least that the public statements are, as First Minister, that she would want she wants the protocol scrapped. Loyalism wants the protocol scrapped. The Orange Order wants the protocol scrapped. Now, if unionism needs to take a coherent position in order for the DUP to succeed at the next election, then it needs to agree on whether it wants the protocol scrapped or modified. I think they're going for a determination that the protocol should be scrapped. And I think Boris Johnson's playing a clever game because he's asking for a relaxation or an extension of a grace period until after that election. And Boris being the
would it be fair to say, we don't know about that exactly yet. Yeah. He's asking for it. We don't know whether it's going to go through. Would it be fair to say that you're fairly sceptical about whether it would last, Malachi? David, you and Connal think it probably will stay. But the short-term
No, I didn't say I was sceptical that the protocol would last.
Well,
all I'm saying is that there are forces within unionism, very strong forces within unionism.
I would agree with that.
I'm
not saying that they'll succeed.
Just following from both
Connal, yes, please.
The difficulty is that it's to do with alternatives, right? And this does go back to Ulster Unionism's classic condition, which is Ulster says no. So they're very good, unionists and loyalists, at wrecking things and saying what they don't want. The difficulty is that the protocol exists for a reason, and it is it's to do with something which is as a cause of the Tory party's red lines. They could have had a situation where they are similar to Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein, even Switzerland, where they have some kind of arrangement in the European Economic Area, and they can then have access to the single market, right? So
I get it, Connal. It's a much broader discussion. If you want to take it out there, I'm going to stop you guys for just a moment because I want to talk about the alternatives. I want to talk about the long-term effects of this on possible Irish reunification. Connal, please carry on if you don't mind picking that ball up and running with it.
Yeah, I think the thing is that there's no question that since Brexit, there's been not only is there a problem potentially in terms of security, there has been an identity shift, and it is, as was said earlier by Malachi, about identity politics to that extent. The Taoiseach of Ireland is taking things, Micheál Martin is taking things quite carefully and slowly. In some ways, it reminds me a little bit of what Sean Lemass was actually trying to do as Irish Taoiseach in the 60s, which is to kind of have encourage cross-border cooperation. And there is going to be this, but it's a softly approach. What I would predict is that there will be, however, a border poll within the next 5 to 10 years. I wouldn't. Some people in Irish America and in Ireland are talking about it occurring in the next few years. I don't think so. It's certainly not going to occur within the scope of the sort of confidence.
Connal, we're running out of time. 5 to 10 years, you say. David, what's your position on this? Within a generation?
I think in terms of a vote, that it's difficult not to see one happening in the next 5 to 10 years. But we're certainly not at a position yet where there's a clear, evident majority in favour of a united Ireland.
Okay, so nobody would know exactly which way the vote would go. Malachi, your thoughts on that prospect? Will there be a referendum of some kind, do you think?
I think there will be a referendum. I think by the time we get to it, if there's careful planning, it'll not be a simple yes, no, in, out, because we have to learn the lessons of Brexit and what a farce that was. But there are many things in play, like the demographic shift. But the big problem for both sides of that argument is the middle ground. The DUP cannot deliver a majority in favour of the Union, but Sinn Féin cannot either deliver a majority in favour of a united Ireland. So I mean, there's this new middle ground. People are talking about the latte drinkers and the Newton Ards Road, but I mean, there's a reality that a lot of people are just
Yeah.
not that
So
concerned
it
about
has
it.
changed. Brexit has changed everything. 15, 20 years ago, when I was reporting from Northern Ireland back in the 80s, would such a vote in the nearish future have been at all thinkable? Last word to you, Malachi. I'm sorry I can't bring you back in, you others, but thank you for your contributions. Malachi, take it away.
Brexit makes a united Ireland more desirable because it's a route back into the European Union. But demographic change and the loss of a Protestant majority makes Northern Ireland a tolerable place to live for nationalists. And those two arguments will play against each other.
Well, indeed, I'm absolutely sure Belfast is a wonderful place to live. That is, unless you happen to be a bird and you're waiting for Malachi's bird feeder to arrive. Listen, thank you, each and every one of you, for taking part in this roundtable. Your expertise, very much appreciated. And wherever you happen to be watching this edition, thank you for your company. You can always get more on our YouTube channel. That's TRT World Roundtable YouTube. Until next time, from me, David Foster, and the team, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.